The dust settled behind the 52 Oldsmobile coupe driving up from Saratoga Lake to John Hall's. The registration was overdue, so I parked the car in the barn, walked up to the house, went in. The screen door slammed behind me. The dog never moved. John was in the kitchen, and he said, "What have you done now?" I said, "What do you mean, what have I done, John?" He said, "The state police were here looking for you." "Looking for me?" He said, "Yeah, and they gave me a card if I see you to call them." I said, "Well, call them." So he called them. 2 detectives showed up. They asked me where I was on the night of such and such. I said, "The Regal Bar." "Anybody see you there?" I said, "Yeah, here's 5 or 6 people that see me there." "What size is your hat?" "My hat?" "Yeah, what head size are you?" I said, 7 1/4. He said, "Have you ever worked for a ranch in Texas?" I said, "I worked for the Lightning Sea Ranch in Dublin, Texas, but I worked for them at Fort Madison, Iowa, and Boston." He said, "Do you know where Troy, New York is?" I says, "Yeah, it's 30 miles from here. I mean, I've been to Troy." He said, "Do you know where the Hudson River Parkway is?" I said, "Yeah, I'm from New York. Of course I know." They said, "Do you own a gun?" I said, "No, I don't own a gun." They said, they asked me another question. I asked them what it was about, and they said, "Well, we'll tell you when it's time." Time for what? At any rate, they gave me their card and said, "If you want to tell me anything, here's this card, call us." I said, "I ain't going to need to tell you anything." So they left, and I thought it was over. The Army called me, and I decided to go in. I mean, you can't. I mean, when they draft you, you got to go. And so I was with Rosalie 2 or 3 nights before that, and I went into basic training at Fort Dix. And her mother called me and said that Rosalie cried herself to sleep 3 nights in a row. I said, "Well, I'll talk to her." So I talked to her on the phone. 45 minutes, she talked me into marrying her, so I did. After basic training, we got married. Went down to the courthouse and got married. And that next Christmas, I was in a snowbank on Buzzards Bay, and a supernumerary came and said, "You just had a son." I said, "I did." He said, "Yeah, do you want to go?" I said, "Yeah, take over. I'm going to get a bus and go back to New York. I want to see my son." So I went back and seen him, and he was great. They sent us up to play war games up in Buzzards Bay and up all that part of that country. And at any rate, so when we got back, I was stationed at Fort Devens in Massachusetts, and that's and then we went to play war games up in Mount Shasta and up there, and when we came back, they were cutting orders, and they said, "We're going to cut orders. You're going to go to Drum up by the finger." I said, "That's too far from me." They said, "Well, we're cutting orders. You ain't got nothing to say about it." So I worked my ass off, seeing Captain Starr. Well, he was a major then, Major Starr, and I told him the story, and so he cut orders. It was funny. That's a whole story in itself. He cut orders so I could get stationed at West Point. And it was great duty. You ate off plates instead of trays. You had bathing suits and pools. It was great. So we were only there a day, and they wanted 3 volunteers to paint the impact area. So me and a guy named Lucas, who was neighbors with Billy Sol Estes from Texas, and another guy, we said, okay, we'll do it. They had old tanks and old cars, you know, and we took and had to put this yellow paint on them, so they were targets for the artillery. So they gave us a bunch of skinny little stiff wire things and some yellow ribbons. We said, what is this for? They said, well, there's some of those rounds that didn't go off. If you find one, push that in the ground. Do not hit it in the ground. Just push it in the ground and tie a yellow ribbon to it. Okay. We found about 2 or 3 rounds laying there on the surface and halfway in the ground that hadn't gone off. And we treaded really gently around them. And we threw paint on the cars and the old tanks and all, and we got it done. You know what this is? This is a piece of 155 howitzer shrapnel at 351 feet per second. This can decapitate you. But we got our 3-day pass, and that was great. So about the 3rd day, I guess it was, I had given my class on artillery, and this light colonel summoned me. And I didn't know what it was about, but he said, so I went in, saluted, sat down in the chair, sit down in the chair. He said, do you know you're a member of the big organization, it's the United States Army, and we're behind you 100%? I said, okay, sir. He said, and, you know, AWOL doesn't do you any good, you know that. I said, sir, I know. What are you talking about? Oh, I've got some bad news for you. I said, what's the bad news, sir? He said, your wife slashed her wrist. And when somebody tells you that, your mind can't work. You can't hardly talk. You don't know what to do. And I said, she did. And so he said, listen, do you have a car? I said, no, but Pinto does. He says, well, get Pinto. You both have 3-day pass. Have him take you home. So I got a hold of Pinto. I said, Pinto, you got a 3-day pass. You got to take me to my house. He said, okay. So Rosalie and PJ were with her mother on the 3rd floor of this tenement. And Pinto dropped me off, and I ran up the first flight. And in front of the door, there was blood all over the ground on the 2nd floor. And then I went up to the 3rd floor, where Rosalie had been with the baby. And I walked in, and her mother's got melancholy, and she's on the couch crying. And I said, where's PJ? And she said, she's with Cookie. That was Rosalie's sister. I walked in the kitchen, and there was blood all over. So I ran back downstairs, and I said, Pinto, take me to the hospital. So he took me to the hospital. And Rosalie was just coming out of the ether, kind of. I said, Rosalie, why? She said, why? I said, yeah, why? She said, well, why did I do what? I said, why did you slash your wrist? She said, slash my wrist? She said, I was washing that porridge pole of PJ's, and it's kind of that heavy, whatever that stuff is, what you can shave with it when it breaks. And she said, I seen the water getting red, and I took my hand out, and it was squirting blood all over the place. So she said, that was it. At any rate, they operated on it. She can't use her pinky finger because it slashed the nerves, and they did something. And I felt better, not better, but it was okay. So I went back. Me and Pinto went back to West Point Monday morning, and I started my class. And that light colonel called me back in again. He said, sit down. I said, okay, sir. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, remember, if you need anything at all, I stared at the floor. I don't understand, sir. I just don't understand. When's your classes? I said, I got one Monday at 10 and I've got one at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. He says, this is an order. You get that one, when you finish the one at 3 o'clock, you leave and I want you on the post. I said, okay, sir, but I still just don't understand. He said, you don't have to, just take care of your family, that's all. So I didn't have to spend much time at West Point, just a couple of classes. So when I got out of the Army, I got a job with Jack the Roofer. And that was hard work, roofing in the heat. At any rate, I was on the roof when Jack Kennedy was killed. I was up on the roof with all kinds of stuff. And then he ran out of work, and somebody said, hey, go to the police department. You can get a job taking care of horses, Squadron A Army up in Manhattan. I said, you know what, you're right. So I applied for that, and they took and said, okay, let's see, you don't have a record. All right, you got to be interviewed if you work for the New York City Police Department. So there's a bunch of about 10 people, and they're sergeants, police sergeants all there, and they sit and they talk to you about, life and everything. And then, and so I got the job, and I worked around the clock. It was hard doing that, but that's what I did, and I needed the money. It was okay. Lieutenant Roan comes to me. He was an Orangeman. He was Irish, but he wore an orange tie. He was great. He said, Paul, there's some state police detectives come to look at you. They want to talk to you in the rec room. I said, okay. So I went to the rec room, and there were these two detectives, and they said, did you know Carrol Segretta? I said, no, never knew Carrol Segretta. Do you know where Troy, New York is? I said, yeah, I go to Saratoga all the time. It's 30 miles away. And you know where I said, yeah. They said, and what's your hat size? I said, I told you guys this. Did you check on the people that I was with that night at the Regal Bar? We'll ask the questions. What about Texas? Did you work for a ranch in Texas? I said, I told you I worked for the Lightning Sea Ranch at Dublin, in Fort Madison, Iowa, and in Boston. They said, well, here's our card. They said, if you want to tell us anything. I said, yeah, you gave me one before, and I didn't need it, and I still don't need it. About 3 weeks went by, and they called me downtown to police headquarters in New York, 100 Center Street. That's where police head. I said, why? I'm getting a commendation because I've never been late or nothing. This is great. So I went down and I went in this guy's office, blue pinstripe suit, had a cigar, bald head, 2 flags behind him, New York State and the American flag, or New York City, I guess, the American flag. And he said, you're a young man, you've got a wife and 2 kids now. He said, so you don't need any bad marks on you. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, that trouble you got in with the state police. I said, what trouble? And I'm trying to think. I was hitchhiking and I spelled a guy, and the car was stolen. And they took me to Ulster County, Justice of the Peace. I told him the story. Even the cop that arrested me felt bad about it, but the Justice of the Peace says, okay, $25 or 25 days. I said, I don't have $25, you're going to have to give me 25 days. So they put me in the clink. Cigarettes on Tuesday, matches on Thursday. So I was there for about 6 days, and Joe Conley and Alice Conley found out I was there, and they came up and they bailed me out. So I said, damn. He said, so you just signed this waiver, he said, and then you won't have any bad marks against you. I don't have to fire you. And my head's swimming again. I'm saying, God damn it. So I signed it. And Lefty says, well, you're going to have to find a job. Find a job. I said, yeah, I will. So I'm bewildered. There was on the night shift, there was a cop by night, and he was a lawyer by day. His name was Tony something, great guy, and I told him the story. He said, you know what? Meet me at the New York Library, that big library. At any rate, tomorrow at 2 o'clock. So I met him there. He wrote a big letter about how I was hitching. It wasn't my fault. I didn't know nothing about it. And he really did it good because he's a lawyer. So when I got back, I gave it to Lieutenant Roan. I said, Lieutenant Roan, here's a letter to explain, why I got put in Ulster County Jail. He took and ripped it up. He said, that ain't got nothing to do with anything. I said, what are you talking about, Lieutenant? He said, there's a deputy chief inspector that found out you were a suspect in a murder. And he's going to have to make you a cop once you pass all this stuff. And he don't want to do it. So he wants to knock your legs out from under you and get rid of you. I said, what? He said, that's the way it is. I said, oh my God. He said, they're no good, but that's the way it is. I said, yeah, but I'm still on that list because I passed the test to be on the list. I took the test twice. People pay $200 to pass that test. I passed it the second time, and I still can't read or write. So I'm on that list, that cops list. I'm on it. So they call me down like they did for the hostler job, and I got there early, and there's 10 sergeants and 10 people coming in and being interviewed. And then they go, Paul Barrett? Yeah, Lieutenant Berlowitz. I said, Lieutenant Berlowitz? I get a lieutenant. I said, this is great. So he sits there. I said, sit here a minute. He said, listen, you had a JD card, you're a rodeo bum, you don't have your GED yet. Chances of you becoming a cop are pretty remote. I remember looking at him. I said, let me tell you something. I never had a JD card, and I wasn't a rodeo bum, okay? And I don't know, he said some other shit that wasn't so. I said, so stop lying so fucking much. And he jumped out of his chair. His jugular vein was popping in his neck. I seen him with his badge and his gun. And he goes, will you take a lie detector test? I says, I'll do anything any other candidate to be a cop will do, whatever that is. He says, okay, get the fuck out of here. So Lieutenant Roan says, Paul, you need a job. Try Carey Transportation. They're always hiring, and it's a good job. It'll work. I said, okay. So I went to Carey Transportation, talked to them, and they said, okay, we'll call you. This is a great story. So this one night, a couple of days after I went, I laid in bed, and Rosalie said, you had a phone call. I said, who? From the police department to take a lie detector test. I said, okay. She said, that's downtown. I said, Rosalie, I know where it is. She said, well, you had a phone call from Carey Transportation. I said, that's uptown. And she said, both of them are 8 o'clock. Now, you talk about pressure. I'm laying looking at the ceiling all night trying to decide, do I let them beat me, the police department, but I got to feed my family. If I don't show up, I ain't getting that job. I can't get jobs. I got no high school education. So I went down to Long Island City and got on the L and waited. I said, I can't make up my mind. Whichever train pulls in first, the one going downtown or the one going uptown, that's the one I'll take. So because God's such a practical joker, both trains came at the same time. And I said, God damn it, God, you ain't have nothing better to do. So I took the train that went uptown because I need to feed my family. I can't be that hard-headed. It's more important. I walked in. Old red-headed secretary says, go down that hall. There's a bunch of doors on the right. She said, go to room 5. I said, okay. So I walked down to room 5, open the door, nobody's in there, and I sit down. And there's a big black machine with naugahyde over it. Black naugahyde. So I'm sitting there about 20 minutes, and this guy comes in, pus-gutted, bald-headed. He says, have you ever had a lie detector test? And I burst out laughing. I said, do you know something? No. He says, what's so funny? I said, God said today, I'm taking a lie detector test. He didn't care how or why, but I'm taking a lie detector test. That's how he is. He's such a practical joker. I don't understand. I said, you don't have to. So he hooks me up. He says, what's your name? What's your address? Do you drink to excess? No. Do you gamble? No. Have you falsified your application? No. Lieutenant Rohn said, when I fill out my application, if they put, why did you quit the police department, put, you're allergic to horses. So that's what I put, I'm allergic to horses. He said, do you gamble to success? No. And what's your address? I told him. He said, do you drink? I said, no. He said, did you falsify your application? I said, no. I knew because when I had to say it, I'm so fucking honest that, I knew they're going to find out. So as luck would have it, so after it's done, I said, did I pass or not? He said, they'll let you know. He turned around to leave. I said, where are you from? He said, I'm from Fort Pierre, South Dakota. I said, I rodeoed with a guy from Fort Pierre, South Dakota, Casey Tibbs. He said, he's a legend. We're going to build a statue to him. You rodeoed with him, huh? I said, yeah. He looks at my application. He says, why didn't you just say you're tired of shoveling shit? I said, I know, I should have. But I did get the job. And then, with Gary Transportation at the TWA building. It's about a month later, and guess what? They say, Barrett, there's some people from the state police at your station to see you. I went nuts. I went and told them, guys, get another pigeon. You want somebody to pin that crime on, get another pigeon. I'm sick of you guys. So then Rosalie got upset with it, and we got a divorce, and I went to California to seek my fortune, trading horses. That's the story.